This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
On today's World Insight, China's mission to lift millions more out of abject poverty accomplished. What does the milestone mean for UN-led efforts to pull most of the world's poor out of hunger and want? A longtime China and development scholar with answers.
There has been enormous progress. Most importantly, China eliminated poverty.
And worsening tensions in the high seas with the U.S. aircraft carrier group again sailing through the South China Sea. How can China steer naval security onto an even keel? A ranking Chinese Navy analyst with direct answers.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Poverty issue has been a global challenge. China has been leading its way in handling this issue. A nearly double rise in disposable income among the rural poor, 9 years compulsory education for children in these households, and an almost universal basic medical insurance coverage for many. These are the experiences China has had in fighting poverty. The number of Chinese who escaped dire poverty accounted for more than 70% of the world's poor in that period from 1978 until today. That is measured by the World Bank poverty thresholds. So what are the challenges facing the world fighting against poverty? And what's the next step for China to go with this development, while at the same time to remain its fighting spirit against poverty? On that, I talked to Columbia University's Professor Jeffrey SACHS, who wrote the book, The End of Poverty, years ago. And we started our conversation from there.
There has been enormous progress. Most importantly, China eliminated poverty. My idea back in 2005 is that we have the technology, the know-how, and the means, therefore, to end extreme poverty on the planet. And extreme poverty has tended to decline markedly, but in no place more than in China, because by standard estimates, starting around 1980, China still had poverty rates around 80%. By 2020, zero. So this is the kind of progress that I envisioned. And fortunately, in other parts of the world, poverty has come down, though in no other place with the speed and scope and depth of what has been achieved in China. Still, I believe that China shows a path of how this can be accomplished, even in the places where poverty still remains rather high, especially in Africa.
Some would also argue China's approach to fight against poverty was also special because of its governance system and the ways of practices. Do you think that is a viable analysis?
Of course, there are specific features that are unique to China, but the fact is that the East Asian region, by and large, experienced rapid economic development. In the case of Japan, rapid recovery after the disaster of that Japan started of World War II. But then Japan went on to a decade of income doubling and many impressive achievements. Korea, Singapore, other countries of East Asia also had quite remarkable economic growth. China, of course, is the biggest country of the region. Its period of dramatic progress in ending poverty and in developing a strong economy began with Deng Xiaoping's reforms in 1978. Three kinds of investments working together, and that is the infrastructure, the investments in people and their skills and their health, and the business investment. China did a tremendous job of mobilizing all three kinds of investment, and they work together. They're not substitutes. You need infrastructure to make businesses work properly. That is transport, power, digital connectivity,
right.
and so forth. But you need skilled workers as well, healthy, productive, well-educated workers. And China had a tremendous surge of quality of education and extent of education. And this has served China very, very well. So it's in this general sense, not the specifics of exactly how the government is organized, exactly how the planning process works in China, exactly the mix between state-owned and private enterprise. I think the broader point is an investment program with a mix of market and planning, and committed to this broad strategy of train young people, mobilize private or business capital, and invest in the infrastructure which makes the economy work.
But Professor Sachs, many would ask, are you trying to hide away from the controversial issues about how China's governance is structured vis-a-vis, let's just say, some of the other political systems? After all, what is likely to be the roles that governance system played in this case? Shouldn't there be much discussion about that too?
The general lesson of success is that one needs a mixed kind of governance. For example, the endless debate about public sector versus private sector, the answer is both, each doing their part. In the question of market versus planning, the answer is both. In the question of electoral government versus China's kind of government, both have proven to be successful. In the case of China, and in the case of other countries, Japan or Korea, with a different political system, I don't really see that kind of debate as being at the core of this issue. What I see at the core of the issue is the economic strategy, the basic mixed kind of economy that depends on effective government and market forces, both playing their role, and finding the right kind of balance that also respects the country's history, its geography, its major challenges at a given moment in development, because that differs a lot by country as well. And then honing a strategy that can fit to the national and the regional needs. It's going to look different to some extent because countries have different histories, different political institutions, different cultures, and different traditions. But I believe that there are some basic ideas about how one can promote prosperity. I would say, incidentally, that I worked with the Asian Development Bank way back in the 1990s to look at the prospects for Asia. And I wrote a book for the Asian Development Bank in 1997 called Emerging Asia. When I look back at that book nearly 25 years later, it's pretty much on target. It said China would continue rapid economic development. Other parts of East Asia would have rapid economic catching up. The potential, I said, was quite broad, not specific to any particular system, but to a set of principles that enable countries that, for whatever historical reason, fell behind in technology or in economic development. Maybe it was war, the colonial domination, whatever the history was, there are ways to catch up. Now, I've been saying the same that Africa, which is also a very complicated situation, Africa has a population of about 1.4 billion today, similar to China. Take some lessons from China and achieve faster development than has been the case in recent years.
Over the past years, there were criticism against China's infrastructure building. But at the end of the day, if we look at even what the U.S. is doing right now with this administration, the new infrastructure investment, the new industrial policy, and also some of the more emphasis on the governance rather than just what the market could do with the latest tax raise possibly. So all of this seem to be following China's footsteps. I see it as rather ironic. It's not necessarily all about the issue that we're talking about today, poverty alleviation, but it has a lot to do with it, about how one could also learn from all the others that are having valuable experiences.
First of all, there's criticism all the time by everybody of everybody else. The United States would attack China for having an industrial policy, but the United States has repeatedly had industrial policies. What was the moonshot, or the development of the internet, or the sequencing of the genome? All of those were industrial policies to get new sectors and technologies going. The reason that the United States attacked China for a lot of this was it didn't want China to be quite so successful of forging this kind of independent path. So a lot of it was hypocrisy or just contradiction, or using terms in a different way, because sometimes Americans have the image of a free market and they're not really aware of how much government has played an important role in the U.S. context. So there's just a lot of confusion and ignorance and easy labels, and some ill will that is also part of geopolitical competition and so on. And there are simply myths. An American myth is, if you're not exactly like America, you can't succeed. Well, I think we've learned, first, that's not true. Second, it's not even a very good idea when the U.S. is having some pretty serious problems. And third, within any country, there are changes of strategy over time depending on circumstances. And this is another major truth about economic development.
Yes.
You have to have your eyes open and adjust to the changing circumstances, and be aware of the need for flexibility, and not to get settled on one fixed course that may have made sense 50 years ago or 30 years ago or 20 years ago, but is completely inappropriate with the new technologies or the new challenges today.
On the other hand, Professor SACHS, there's also a debate about the resilience of systems. Here, we are not just talking about the systems. We are focusing more on anti-poverty issues, but they are really related to also the governance issues. So one could see at a certain period of time of history, one system might work better than the others. But in other period of time, when there are different priorities, maybe another system would work better than this one that we just talked about. How do you see this issue in terms of the framework of poverty alleviation, Professor?
First, I would say in general, challenges that societies face change over time. And so things that work in one generation may become completely inappropriate in another generation. Second, there is a big difference of the institutions and the challenges of catching up versus forging new directions. And what do I mean by this? If you look at China's economic history, China was the world leading economy for maybe 1,000 years, roughly between 500 and 1500. But by the 19th century, China really was lagging behind technologically and organizationally Britain. And Britain, for a lot of reasons and accidents, became the first country to industrialize. And Britain, on the basis of that industrialization, became the world's leading imperial power. And of course, Britain launched devastating wars against China starting in 1839 with the First Opium War. I mention all of this history because between 1839 and the founding of the People's Republic in 1949, China had a disastrous period, really a disastrous period of internal civil wars, of tremendous tumult of Japan's invasion of China in World War II. And so by the 1950s, China was an impoverished country. And that's why I said that as late as 1978, when Deng Xiaoping began the market opening, China was an impoverished country that had perhaps 80% of the population in extreme poverty. But it meant that what China needed in the 1980s onward was a kind of catching up growth, rapid catching up. China was way behind the technology frontier. It had to find every possible way to build the basics. And when you're building the basics, you can, if you're doing a good job like the Chinese government did, it's possible to have extraordinarily fast economic development, just like Japan had done during its decade of doubling in the 1960s and so forth. But that's a particular circumstance. Now, China is still in some ways catching up, but it's also in some ways at the technological lead. The institutions are going to have to also change in new ways and evolve. And so I would say that flexibility, attention to new circumstances, not getting dug in to old vested interests, not getting stuck in one's ways is also very, very important. The United States got stuck, I think, for 40 years between 1980 and very recently in really not having effective governance for infrastructure and for some other parts of the economy and for basic social fairness and decent education. We got lazy in this country and very much divided. And now I'm hoping that with this new administration, there is a new understanding that we need an activist government in new ways to solve new problems. China has big challenges now because the 40 dramatically successful years of economic growth were also highly polluting. And now the big challenge is quality of life. The big challenge is reducing tremendously the pollution for China's sake and as part of a world effort to stop the dangerous climate change. So this is also a new kind of challenge. And I would say that it is the ability to adjust to the changing circumstances that is a key part of success over long periods of time. Not so easy to do because success can breed complacency or countries can get stuck in a particular power structure or a particular way of doing things or particular power of lobbying groups within the political or the economic structures. And so keeping flexible, alert, and realistic is very, very important.
I love everything you just said. A beautiful analysis, Professor. My last set of questions has to do with the green development. You earlier talked about the new challenges economies, particularly like China, are facing. That is the huge transformation we're seeing of green development, led by initiatives on climate change, but how And what would that mean for the haves and the have-nots? How do you see, the next stage when you say remain alerted, remain vigilant? How can we be in terms of that change, which it should be very positive overall?
Well, I think the starting point is where you just ended the question. The change can be very positive. And so China worked very hard to create the kind of middle income success that China is today, plus a very dynamic society and very dynamic economy, and one that is at the cutting edge of a lot of technology. It's a huge, huge achievement. But I would say that it also opens up a new opportunity for China, which I think the leadership really recognizes when it talks about the fact that now is the time for improving the quality of life. The situation is not desperate. It's not a matter of desperate poverty. I think it's an opportunity for China to improve the quality of life, which is going to be, by the way, cleaner air, bluer skies, a big advantage in nature, which I think is going to be big benefit for health and for the quality of daily life. But with China's successes in many important technologies, in the future of electric vehicles, in 5G connectivity, in advances in healthcare, in advances in agriculture, China has a real opportunity to continue not only with the end of poverty, which has been completed, but with the improvements of the quality of life and well-being of the people. And I think that that's the appropriate objective. And it means, as you say, facing challenges that some sectors are going to decline. Coal, which has been a mainstay of the Chinese economy, does not have a long-term future. And so this requires attentiveness to the coal regions, and the workers are going to need help over time in order to do new things. But China's been very, very good at restructuring and new opportunities and building new sectors and enjoying more leisure, expanding educational opportunities. So I think that this can be done. And I personally like the mixed structure that China has, the 5-year plans. And this really enables a deep look at the public investment needs in the society. And it has a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship too. And that's a very good combination for the kinds of changes ahead.
Jeffrey Sachs, as always, a great pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Great to be with you.